Things that I personally feel are great about poetry, I would say probably the first would be the variability of the narrative experience that you're able to get from poetry and verse versus prose, what we are sort of primed to expect from a narrative experience in stories these days, contemporary story forms. Beginning, middle, end, you sort of go on a different journey with poetry. You do still have a progression, and there is definitely a story to be found within poetry. I think it's one of the big misconceptions. A lot of times, poetry, even going back to, way back in the history of poetry, back to the beginning, it was always about a story, about a narrative, usually conveying either a personal experience or a group experience. And I think that sort of blends into the second great thing about poetry, which is the presentation, not just on the page, but you get the whole performance aspect of poetry. Again, going back in history, you have poetry as something that was easy to remember and recite due to various literacy issues over time. Poetry has been very popular, either as a form of stage play, say in iambic pentameter of Shakespeare, or something that had very rigid structure and rhyme format that was easy to accompany music in the case of, say, a bard who was trying to convey a battle or some historical event. So you have that special connection then between the audience and the poet. There are a lot of fiction readings out there, but I think it's much more common to find at, say, a open mic night or in the university setting or various conventions. Lots of poetry readings going on out there. It's a practice that is alive and well. So in terms of being a fan of poetry, you get maybe much more, you're able to glean more layers of meaning from the poems in the live experience. And as a writer, you're definitely able to see immediately what is working and what isn't, what the audience is getting or not getting from your poetry in that arena. And there is also now with research the added benefit of apparently, memorizing, reciting poetry, which again is a common practice not just for writers but also for people who are fans of poetry. Hey, it helps your brain health over time. Who knew, right? Also, apparently, poetry leads to better vocabulary and verbal flexibility. So there are all sorts of benefits. And then you have what I think is also like the third great thing about poetry. You're able to really go pretty deep emotionally very quickly as compared to, say, a prose piece, a novel, or a short story where you have to have all the background and all the characters, history a lot of times before you really get to the meat of things, really get invested and feel involved. But with poetry, a lot of times you're able to skip around, you're able to get straight to the more emotional core of things. So that to me is, it can be fun in the case of, say, something that's funny, humorous, poetry, very big. Love is, a great experience, of course. There is also horror poetry. There's stuff that is sad or even brutal. Recollections of various battles or wars or things like that have happened. But then there's also the format. There's so many forms to explore, hundreds from around the world, that either give you flexibility in exploring themes or, due to their rigid nature, allow you to sort of jumpstart the writing process. A lot of times as an author, you may need a prompt or something, but if you have a certain poetry form, you kind of know where you're going to go with that from the beginning, and it's easier to get into the writing. you kind of just never get bored of poetry.